Chris Hassel joined by Brady, Quinn, and Pete Prisco, who refuses to come into studio. Let's talk winners and losers from the NFL's offseason to this point. You like that?
I do.
We got the draft coming up next month, but free agency now, and we've had trades as well. We're going to talk winners and losers from players' perspectives and from team perspectives. From a player perspective, a winner, I mean, how could it not be Christian Kirk? I mean, he seemed to outperform what people thought he was going to get deal-wise.
He's never had over 1,000 yards receiving. And look at the contract that he signed. I mean, he's one of the top-paid wide receivers in the NFL now. And we talked about this earlier. You know, to me, when you see a signing like this, it's because people are looking for two things. You know, his age and the potential, you know, the upside that he still may have at this point in time. And I think if you look at, too, his ability to separate, that's becoming more of a common thought, you know, cause in the league is for wide receivers is the ability to be able to have that sort of speed to separate, make it an easier throw on the quarterback. So to me, Pete, it's Christian Kirk, which I know you're going to echo, but I also think there's another guy we need to talk about that cashed in as well.
Yeah, it's Christian Kirk for me. I mean, my gosh, look, did they overpay for him? Absolutely. Is it still a good move? Absolutely. And you touched on it, Brady. This is a guy whose best football is ahead of him. He's 25 years old. He caught 77 passes. By the way, that's more than Amari Cooper caught last year for the Dallas Cowboys, for anybody who wants to keep score. Christian Kirk is a rising player. I went back and watched all of his snaps yesterday, and one of the things I noticed was he had some success down the field with Colt McCoy when he was in the game. Trevor Lawrence will love him. They needed a receiver, and there's no number one receivers on the market. Let's be real. They're all number twos. They're not number ones. The guys who made it to the market are number two receivers. That's what he is. Did he get overpaid? Absolutely, but they had to do it.
You can make that case, too, by the way, about a lot of players that make it to free agency. I mean, if the guys are that highly valued, the team's tagging them, they're not letting them get out the door. So that's the reality of it. Randy Gregory, Pete, is the other one to me that I think you got to talk about because given his history and his track record, I mean, people fail to realize he's 29 years old. He'll be 30 this upcoming season. He's never played an entire season. He's played in 50 total games, and he's almost 30. I believe he's only started 12, 14 in his career. And so when you look at his track record, yeah, you see the upside, you see the ability to rush the passer, get pressure. He's never even got past 6 sacks in any season. So to me, the value of the contract, that's one thing. And we keep talking about upside. Obviously, people are looking at him saying, well, he's missed some time, but he's still got some youth to him as far as his legs, and he's got some upsides. We think he can still develop into an even better pass rusher and player than what he's been, but it's also the contract. When you look at how things fell apart with Dallas, it was the language that Dallas wanted to put within that contract that wasn't in the Dak Prescott contract, that wasn't, you know, in other contracts that have been there in Dallas, or second contracts, I should say. That given his track record, it was something that Dallas wanted. Broncos didn't want to put that in there. So Randy Gregory is the other player that I think is no doubt a winner, given the money that he's going to end up making too, and the language within that contract that obviously was an issue with Dallas.
Let's move on to team winners now. And, Pete, you wanted to follow on that?
No, I was just going to say, look, the desire and want to have a pass rusher kind of supersedes all of that. That's just basically what it comes down to, and you know that, Brady. If you don't have one, you better get one. And if you don't have one, you better get two.
My thing is I think you just got guys who didn't deal with that quite as much in Von Miller, Chandler Jones, like Randy Gregory has, and it's not like he's that much younger necessarily, at least in age. Now, granted, as far as reps and snaps, he's much younger than Chandler Jones or Von Miller. They played a lot more football, but those two also have over 100 sacks since 2012. We're looking at Randy Gregory, who's not even close to that number.
They've performed. He has not. Let's move on to team winners. And I knew at least one of you would pick the Jacksonville Jaguars. I just thought it would be Pete.
I did too, honestly. I was shocked to find out that Pete did not pick the Jaguars. Now, I'm saying this because they clearly identified the fact that they needed roster upgrades, and they've spent money, which I think when you're a bad football team, you have to attack it twofold. You got to spend the money that you have in free agency to plug some of those holes. You get Brandon Scherf, who obviously is going to help solidify that offensive line. Christian Kirk helps create some separation, something the wide receivers were not able to do. Zay Jones as well, and Evan Ingram can be a mismatch from time to time. You put him on a one-year prove-it deal. So you have a number of pieces that I think they added to this offense that should help out Trevor Lawrence, which ultimately will determine whether or not they win. Now, at the end of the day, is winning the offseason mean anything? Of course not. But at least the Jacksonville Jaguars have been active and realized that this entire, offense and defense had some spots where they needed some upgrades.
You know what, though, Brady? Teams that have won the offseason lately have actually had increases in wins over the last couple of years. So maybe it does matter. But is this the group that's going to put them over the top? Probably not. I mean, they still got to draft well, and they still got to get more players. But this was a team that didn't have any talent. So I almost picked Jacksonville, but I didn't because I didn't want to hear it from you two, so I did not pick them. I went with the Denver Broncos, and this isn't just in free agency, but it's also the whole body of work in the offseason so far. You land a franchise quarterback at the age is 33. That's incredible. It's stupidity on the part of the Seahawks, and it's incredible on the part of the Broncos. It takes them over the top. And then defensively, you mentioned Gregory. They had DJ Jones, who I really like as a defensive lineman. I think they've improved across the board. This team is ready to compete. Tough division, but they're ready to compete.
Let's get to player losers now. And Pete, I'm going to let you go first on this one because 3 of your top 10 ranked free agents have not signed yet. That includes your top 2 players, an offensive lineman, a defensive lineman, but also your top wide receiver still on the board.
Yeah, Allen Robinson, to me, is the biggest loser so far. Look, he came into the offseason looking for $15 million a year. I don't think he's going to get that. One of the concerns with Allen Robinson is he doesn't run that well. He's a 50-50 ball guy, and so teams are reluctant to pay him that big money deal. Brady touched on it when he talked about Christian Kirk. They want guys who can run, and he doesn't run that well. So I think right now he's the biggest loser, but he could end up being a big winner, and here's why. If he goes to the right situation where there is a speed guy, a threat on the other side, he could really have a successful season and might be able to cash in on the other side. He's never played with a good quarterback. Go somewhere where there's a good quarterback, have a big year, and then cash in if you don't get a big deal this year.
That's loser for now, I guess, according to Pete, because he could become a big winner.
Yeah, and I think he's the player that might fit in the category of signing a one-year deal, kind of one-year prove-it deal. Then you put yourself in a position to re-up with that team or hit the free agent market again once you can prove yourself. Now, it would make a lot of sense. I think he's a heck of a player. For me, the biggest losers so far in this offseason or free agency period is the AFC offensive lineman because the AFC West has loaded up with edge rushers, and now you've got to deal with even more speed, more power, more issues up front. And so really it's the offensive lineman in the AFC West for all those teams, whether it's the Chargers, Raiders, Chiefs, Broncos. Every single time you're playing a divisional game, you've got some mismatched nightmares, and you can't be looking forward to that twice a year. So, unfortunately for the AFC West offensive lineman, you're the biggest loser of this free agency period.
I like that picture of Chandler Jones getting ready to sack Russell Wilson because Chandler Jones is following Russell Wilson into the AFC West. Let's go to team losers. And Pete, I think some fans could probably argue Chiefs because everybody in that division seems to be getting better, but the Chiefs, they feel like they're so good, they're good enough, they don't have to do that much. You're going with somebody else in the AFC.
Yeah, and I'm going to go with another team that probably thinks they're an ascending team and doesn't have to do too much, and that's the New England Patriots. And normally, when you see them, they kind of sit back and let it all unfold for a while. They didn't last year. They spent a lot of money right from the get-go and tried to supplement that roster. Some of it worked out, some of it didn't. But this year, they're kind of sitting back and waiting, and that's why I think they're a loser. They lost their right guard. They traded him away, Shaq Mason, to the Buccaneers. Their right tackle's an unrestricted free agent right now, hasn't signed back. They've signed back some guys. Their biggest signing so far, think about this, Devin McCourty coming back, Nick Folk, a 37-year-old kicker, coming back, and Matthew Slater, who's probably 120 as their special teams guru, coming back. That's not a lot of haul for free agency, and unless they kind of pick off guys coming up, I'm disappointed in what they've done so far.
I'm disappointed in the Detroit Lions. I think you look at the roster, we knew going into last season they were going to struggle because it was one of the worst rosters out there. It was young and experienced in some ways, and they lacked the ability to find some talent. The really big free agent signing is DJ Chark on a one-year prove-it deal, who last year wasn't able to play much, was kind of banged up. I think throughout the course of his career, the concern you have, as much as he's talented, he's big, he's fast, and he can separate, is his consistency. The best ability is durability, and he's got more of that kind of track mentality. And that's really your biggest free agent signing. If you're looking at the Lions roster, you're saying it's one of the worst in the league. And if you got some money to spend, you've got to figure out a way of how to upgrade it. And I know they've been more patient with their approach, maybe looking for that second wave of free agents where they might find better value for what they're getting. But, just in comparison to the Jacksonville Jaguars, since those two teams were competing for that #1 overall draft pick this year. The Jaguars have been active. They've been trying to improve that roster. And meanwhile, Detroit's hanging back. I don't think you can afford to. And Pete touched on it a moment ago. Teams are being rewarded for being active. It has equated to, finding some more wins, finding more success that following season, and then building off of that. And obviously the Jaguars are doing that right now, and the Detroit Lions have not.
Yeah, LA Rams did it last season, won the Super Bowl because of it. Brady Quinn, Pete Prisco with us here as the new league year begins in the NFL. All Things Covered is our podcast from Patrick Peterson and Bryant McFadden. Latest episode focusing on Patrick Peterson's free agency and his desire to return to the Vikings.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.